Huh? Hey, look who's finally up. Nocturnal little rascal, how are you doing? uh, Too shy to talk, I see. Well, I'm just doing some homework. Would you care to join? Sure, you can get all on my lap by all means. Um, Let me just move my computer. Sorry, that's pizza from earlier tonight. I'm actually quite thirsty. Shit. Give me a minute. My apologies. Get this plate out of the way. Do I have any pizza crust in my teeth? No? Good. Okay. I can't do my homework if you're, like, on my chest. It's alright, silly. Oh. Okay. I could... Here, I'll just read to you. Because we're both learning about this together. And although I don't care for what the country America is doing right now, I'm still learning a history class about it. So you're along for the ride with me because you're mine. Alright, little kitten. Strap in for a million paragraphs of boring. Okay. This excerpt is titled Common Sense. Here, I'm gonna take my nightly pills actually before I start. I need to get to sleep soon, so just gonna take these. Barely any water left, but that's fine. There we go. Alright. Get cozy. Okay. Common sense. As 1776 dawned, America presented the unusual... Okay, I'm actually going to whisper this. As 1776 dawned, America presented the unusual spectacle of colonists at war against the British Empire, but still pleading for their rights within it. Even as fighting raged, Congress in July 1775 had addressed the Olive Branch Petition to George III. Excuse me. Reaffirming Americans' loyalty to the crown and hoping for permanent reconciliation. Oh my god, excuse me. Alright, that's all the bodily noises. Ironically, it was a recent immigrant from England, not a colonist from a family long established on American soil, who grasped the inner logic of the situation and offered a vision of the broad significance of American independence. An English craftsman and minor government official, Thomas Paine, had immigrated to Philadelphia late in 1774. He quickly became associated with a group of advocates of the American cause, including John Adams and Dr. Benjamin Rush, a leading Philadelphia physician. It was Rush who suggested to Paine that he write a pamphlet supporting American independence, Its author listed as quote, an Englishman, unquote, Common Sense appeared in January 1776. The pamphlet began not with a recital of colonial grievances, but with an attack on the so much boasted Constitution of England, unquote, and the principles of hereditary rule and monarchical government. Tough word, honkin'. You're learning a lot. Rather than being the most perfect system of government in the world, Paine wrote the English monarchy was headed by the, quote, the rule brute of England, end quote, and the English Constitution was composed in a large part of, quote, the base remains of two ancient tyrannies, monarchical tyranny in the beginning in the person of the king, and aristocratical tyranny in the persons of the peers, end quote. Quote, of more worth is one honest man to society in the sight of God, end quote, he continued. Quote, than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived. Of more worth is one honest man to society and in the sight of God than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived, end quote. Alright. Far preferable when monarchy would be a democratic system based on frequent elections, with citizens' rights protected by a written constitution. Turning to independence, Paine drew on the colonists' experiences to make his case. There is something absurd, he wrote, quote, in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island, end quote. During a lecture in class today, my teacher talked about professor. My professor talked about how basically the colonists didn't want to be governed as a huge country they didn't want to be governed as a huge country by one small island. Anyway, within the British Empire, America's prospects were limited, liberated from the Navigation Acts and trading freely with the entire world. Its, quote, material eminence, end quote, was certain. Paine tied the economic hopes of the new nation to the idea of commercial freedom. With independence, moreover, the colonies could for the first time insulate themselves for involvement in the endless imperial wars of Europe. Britain had dragged its American colonies into conflicts with countries like Spain and France. They never were our enemies as Americans, but as our being the subjects of Great Britain, end quote. Membership in the British Empire, Paine insisted, was a burden to the colonies, not a benefit. Toward the close of the pamphlet, Paine moved beyond practical consideration to outline a breathtaking vision of the historical importance of the American Revolution. Quote, the cause of America, he proclaimed in stirring language, is in great measure the cause of all mankind. The new nation would become the home of freedom, an asylum for mankind. Okay, that's the end of that section. Okay, this is Paine's impact. Most of Paine's ideas were not original. What made Common Sense unique was his mode of expressing them in the audience he addressed. Previous political writings had generally been directed toward the education elite. When I mention the public, when I mention the public, end quote, declared John Randolph of Virginia in 1774, quote, I mean to include the rational part of it. The ignorant, vulgar, and are unfit to manage the reins of government, end quote. In just so you know, you you obviously aren't taking any classes, so you wouldn't have to worry about it if you miss something that I say. Just as evangelical ministers had shattered the trained, I don't know that word, Clergys. Clergy. The body of all people uh, ordinated for religious duties, especially in Christian church. I don't want to butcher saying this, so that thing's monopoly on religious preaching. Paine pioneered a new style of political writing, one designed to expand dramatically the public sphere, where political discussion took place. He wrote clearly and directly, and he avoided the complex language and Latin phrases common in pamphlets aimed at educated readers. Common Sense quickly became one of the most successful and influential pamphlets in the history of political writing, selling, by Paine's estimate, some 150,000 copies. Paine directed that his share of the profits be used to buy supplies for the Continental Army. In February 1776, the Massachusetts political leader Joseph Hawley read Common Sense and remarked, quote, "Every sentiment has sunk into the well-prepared heart," end quote. The hearts of Hawley and thousands of other Americans had been prepared for Paine's arguments by the extended conflict over Britain's right to tax the colonies, the outbreak of war in 1775, the growing conviction that Britain was a corrupt society where liberty was diminishing, the intensification of fighting in the winter of 75 to 76, 1776, when Americans unsuccessfully invaded Canada, while the British burned Falmouth, which is now Portland, Maine, and burned Falmouth, Maine, and bombarded Norfolk, Virginia, gave added weight to the movement for independence. In the spring of 1776, scores of American communities adopted resolutions calling for a separation from Britain. Only 6 months elapsed between the appearance of Common Sense and the decision by the Second Continental Congress to sever the colonies' ties with Great Britain. Holy shit. That's crazy. Here we are. The Declaration of Independence. On July 2nd, 1776, the Congress formally declared the United States an independent nation. 2 days later, it approved... Oh, sorry. Here, I can pet your head. Right there. Right behind the ear. There we go. There we go. Okay. 2 days later, it approved the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson and revised by the Congress before approval. Most of the Declaration consists of a lengthy list of grievances directed against King George III, ranging from quartering troops in colonial homes to imposing taxes without the colonists' consent. Britain's aim, it declared, was to establish absolute tyranny over the colonies. One clause in Jefferson's draft, which condemned the inhumanity of the slave trade and criticized the king for overturning colonial laws that sought to restrict the importation of slaves, was selected by the Congress at the insistence of Georgia and South Carolina. The Declaration's enduring impact came not only from the complaints against George III, but from Jefferson's preamble, especially the second paragraph, which begins, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, end quote. By, quote, unalienable rights, end quote, Jefferson meant rights so basic, so rooted in human nature itself, or in what John Locke had called the state of nature, that no government could take them away. Jefferson then went on to justify the breach with Britain. Government, he wrote, derives its powers from, quote, the consent of the governed, end quote. When a government threatens its subjects' natural rights, the people have the authority, quote, to alter or to abolish it, end quote. The Declaration of Independence is ultimately an assertion of the right of revolution. The Declaration and American Freedom. The Declaration of Independence changed forever the meaning of American freedom. It completed the shift from the rights of Englishmen to the rights of mankind as the object of American independence in Jefferson's language. The laws of nature and of nature's God, not the British Constitution or the heritage of the freeborn Englishman, justified independence. No longer a set of specific rights, no longer a privilege to be enjoyed by a corporate body or people in certain social circumstances. Liberty had become a universal entitlement. Jefferson's argument, natural rights, the right to resist arbitrary authority, etc., drew on the writings of John Locke, who, as explained in the previous chapter, saw government as resting on a social contract, violation of which destroyed the legitimacy of authority. But when Jefferson substituted the pursuit of happiness for property in the familiar Lockean triad that opens the Declaration, he tied the new nation's star to an open-ended democratic process whereby individuals develop their own potential and seek to realize their own life goals. Individual self-fulfillment, unimpeded by government, would become a central element of American freedom. Tradition would no longer rule the present, and Americans could shape their society as they saw fit. An asylum for mankind. A distinctive definition of nationality resting on American freedom was born in the Revolution. From the beginning, the idea of, quote, American exceptionalism, end quote, the belief that the United States has a special mission to serve as a refuge from tyranny, a symbol of freedom, and a model for the rest of the world, has occupied a central place in American nationalism. The new nation declared itself in the words of Virginia leader James Madison, the, quote, workshop of liberty to be to the civilized world, end quote. Pains remark in Common Sense, quote, we have it in our power to begin the world over again, and his description of the new nation as an asylum for mankind, end quote, expressed a sense that the Revolution was an event of global historical importance. Countless sermons, political tracts, and newspaper articles of the time repeated this idea. Unburdened by the institutions, monarchy, aristocracy, hereditary privilege that oppressed the peoples of the Old World, America and America alone was the place where the principle of universal freedom could take root. This was why Jefferson addressed the Declaration to, quote, the opinions of mankind, end quote, not just the colonists themselves or Great Britain. First to add to the name to the Declaration of Independence was the Massachusetts merchant John Hancock, president of the Second Continental Congress, with a signature so large he declared, according to legend, that King George III could read it without his spectacles. The Global Declaration of Independence. The American colonists were less concerned with securing human rights for all mankind than with winning international recognition in their struggle for independence from Britain. But Jefferson hoped that this rebellion would become, quote, the signal of arousing men to burst the chains and to assume the blessings and security of self-government, end quote. And for more than 2 centuries, the Declaration has remained an inspiration not only to generations of Americans denied the enjoyment of their natural rights, but to colonial peoples around the world seeking independence. The Declaration quickly appeared in French and German translations, although not at first in Spanish. In Spanish, since the government... Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Declaration quickly appeared in French and German translations, although not at first in Spanish. Okay. Since the government feared it would inspire dangerous ideas among the people of Spain's American Empire. In the years since 1776, numerous anti-colonial movements had modeled their own declarations of independence on Americas. The first came in Flanders, part of today's Belgium, then part of the Austrian Empire, where rebels in 1790 echoed Jefferson's words by declaring that their province, quote, is and of rights ought to be a free and independent state, end quote. By 1826, the year of Jefferson's death, some 20 other declarations of independence had been issued in Europe, the Caribbean, and Spanish America. Today, more than half the countries in the world, in places as far-flung as China, issued after the Revolution of 1911, and Vietnam, 1945, have such declarations. Many of these documents, like Jefferson's, listed grievances against an imperial power to justify revolution. Few of these documents, however, have affirmed the natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson invoked over time, the Declaration in a global context has become an assertion of the right of various groups to form independent states rather than a list of the rights of citizens that their own governments could not abridge. But even more than the specific language of the Declaration, the principle that legitimate political authority rests on the will of, quote, the people, end quote, has been adopted around the world. In 1776, the Declaration inspired critics of the British system of government to demand political reform. In 1780, even as the American War of Independence raged, a Jesuit educated Indian of Peru took the name of the last Inca ruler, Tupac Amaru, and led an uprising against Spanish rule. By the time it was suppressed in 1783, some 10,000 Spanish and 100,000 Indians had perished. In the Dutch, French, and Spanish empires, where European governments had been trying to tighten their control much as the British had done in America, local elites demanded greater autonomy, often drawing on the constitutional arguments of American patriots. The idea that the people possess rights was quickly internationalized. Slaves in the Caribbean, colonial subjects in India, and indigenous inhabitants of Latin America could all speak this language, to the dismay of those who exercised power over them. You're asleep. Good night, my little starfire. Sweet dreams.